From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Hi, and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. My name is Jason and I'm one of the hosts of the show. The aim of the podcast is to rapidly increase the knowledge and application of psychological health and safety in workplaces worldwide. To help this, we have regular guests from around the world who are leading the way in this important area. But before I introduce our guest and topic for today, allow me to introduce my co-host, Joelle Mitchell. How are you today, Joelle?
I'm all right. We've had the big 10 birthday happen in my house, so that was an exciting milestone.
Yeah, that was yesterday, right?
It was yesterday, yep. The party is still to come, so that will be another very exciting time.
Yeah. So last year it was parkour. What's this year?
It's at it calls itself like a gaming museum. So basically it has like all of the different gaming consoles, like dating right back to the like
old Ataris and that sort of thing. Yeah.
And loads of games for all of the different generations of consoles. So yeah, you basically just go in there and play with whichever console and whichever game you want.
Cool. So he's got some of his best mates going along?
Yep.
Yeah. Should be a good day. So is that Saturday?
Sunday.
Okay, cool.
Yep. And not at my house, so I don't have to clean up afterwards, which is the main thing.
Yeah. We actually had a surprise birthday party for my 11-year-old last weekend, and we did it in such a fashion that she was totally surprised because we dropped past Dad's work to pick up something quickly, and the party was actually here. And she reckoned she fainted because we went into what seemed like a completely dark and abandoned office, and she walked into the boardroom and 30 people yelled surprise really loudly. So, yes, she thinks she might have blacked out for a moment from surprise.
She did fall over from what I could see on your recording of it.
Luckily she didn't hit her head.
Yeah. In 10 years' time, a therapist is going to be like, so what's this trauma around your birthday? Why do you hate it every year?
Yeah. She had a great time, though, so hopefully it's a positive association with the birthday. Yeah.
Yes. Overrules any initial terror.
Yeah. Now, moving on from birthdays.
We need an update, don't we?
Yeah, we did report. We said we would report. So, Joelle, how did you like the sexual harassment training?
Pause there. Despite my cynicism, I must report that the virtual sexual harassment training the VR sexual harassment training was much better than I had expected. It is like the format of it was more bystander training. So you're in a room, you're sort of observing an interaction between three people. Then it sort of takes you out and takes you through different approaches that you can use to intervene in the situation. So different strategies that you can use, like distract or address it directly or whatever that might be. And then it gives you you go back in and it gives you the option then to intervene, and you actually use your own voice for it. So you're talking, and then also after the interaction, you're in the room and you're then having a conversation with the person who is being sexually harassed, and it again gives you different options of how to engage in that conversation. I think the VR aspect of it, because it's a person there and she's making eye contact with you and she's emoting, I think it does actually really engage with the emotional aspects of your brain a lot more than something like watching, even watching actors do something would do. And
it's as close to a role play as you're going to get.
I think it's even better than a role play because the characters that you're interacting with are genuine, so you don't get the awkwardness of a role play or,
people watching you do the role
feeling
play
like you're there and you're on display and everyone's kind of laughing and joking and whatever. So, I think it was more effective than I'd expected. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was the thing that I found was most impactful was that you don't select your response like you would with e-learning. You actually have to voice it. It all works on voice command. And even though I wanted to try the inappropriate responses that I knew were inappropriate.
You really need a thicker skin, that one?
Yeah, you really need a thicker skin. Yeah, get over it kind of thing. It was very hard and awkward to say that.
I'm glad that it was hard and awkward for you to say that.
I know. So, it was I wanted to see how she would respond, and she does course correct and make sure that, it's still you're still covering the material in the way that you should. But yeah, it was quite interesting. I thought it was a gimmick, but I think that there's a lot of benefits potentially for it over and above any other kind of bystander type training that you might do in another way. And obviously a lot more cost effective and scalable than, say, hiring actors and role players and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So we're reporting back pleasantly surprised, which is always nice.
Yes. Yeah. VR training, we're giving it our tacit thumbs up.
Yeah. And we'll see what the research says.
Yes.
But from our own anecdotal experience, it was good.
Yes.
4 stars.
Stamp of okay.
Stamp of okay. Yeah. All right. Well, look, our guest has been very patiently waiting.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'd like to introduce him in now. He is an organisational psychologist, surprise, surprise, who started his career as a professional tennis player and sports psychologist. That was something I wanted to do. He has
Tennis or sports psychology?
Sports psychology. Yeah, I was never aspired to be a tennis player. Basketball player, maybe. He has over 30 years' experience in both external consulting roles for global organisations and internal HR, organisational development and general management roles. He's currently managing director at Steople and chair of the Australian College of Organisational Psychologists. A warm welcome to this podcast, Hayden Fricke.
Thank you very much. Great to be here, guys.
And thanks for, putting up with us and our remarks about birthdays and VR training and all the rest, waiting there patiently to come on.
You are absolutely fine. It's always nice to hear about people's personal lives, their 10th or 11th birthdays, or as my kids are, 23, 21 and 18. So I've been there.
Yep. So you've got the war wounds. Yes, we're not there yet.
No. Hayden's on the other side.
Just.
Yeah.
So Hayden, what podcast do you like to listen to?
Look, I must admit I'm not a big podcast listener, but a couple of favourite ones, probably top 2. I love Adam Grant's work-life stuff. He's just a fascinating guy and interviews some great people and really interesting to listen to. I also try to listen to stuff that's outside of my own sphere of expertise. So there's a podcast called Hack Your Own PR by Odette Gray, I think it is. And I just love listening to that sort of stuff, which is how do you take your messages from an org psych perspective and get them out there?
Yeah, that's a challenge for lots of people in the pracademia space.
That's right. We're taught how to do evidence-based research, but we're not taught how to actually get the messages out there in simple ways.
Yep.
I'm finding memes work well.
Yes, the meme master general. So can you tell us about your professional career? It sounds quite interesting, starting out in tennis.
Yeah, it's always interesting when I tell my story, they forget everything else except that I used to be a tennis player. So I will start there. My story sort of starts at school. All I wanted to do was be a professional tennis player. My mum said to me, Hayden, get your HSC or Year 12 as it was then. And what do I need that for? I'm going to be a superstar tennis player. I don't need to be to get anything. And she said, no, just in case. So I did get my Year 12 HSC, higher school certificate, only just. I failed 2 out of 5 subjects, and looking back at the time, I thought I was dumb, but I realised later I wasn't. I just was focused on other things. So when I finished school, I had a full tennis scholarship to a college in the US, in Tennessee, no pun intended, and had this amazing experience as a young 18-year-old at college in the US. So you're playing tennis against the best college tennis players in the world. So, a team of 8 people, the top player was from Spain. I was number 2 from Australia. Number 3 was Swedish. Number 4 was so we had a really global team and some great experiences. After 12 months of college, they wanted me to stay on for 4 years, and I decided that I wanted to turn professional. So I played the lowest level of professional tennis, called the satellite circuit, for another 3 years. After about 3 years, I realised that I was a great practice partner and I could beat top players in the world in practice, but when it really counted, I would lose to lowly ranked players. And I kind of learnt that I was taught how to hit the ball, and I was fit and I was keen. No one ever taught me how do I handle anxiety and stress and pressure, and how do I actually stop choking and play at my best level. I had studied 2 psychology subjects in the US, and I really enjoyed it. And I heard about sports psychology, and I decided that's what I want to do. So I went to university, became a sports psych. I worked for 5 years as a sports psychologist. I also did some work with drug and alcohol counselling and people with mental illness as a young psychologist. And I realised after 5 years there wasn't enough money to make a full living in sports psych. Didn't really want to take people that were down and out and just help them survive in the drug and alcohol counselling area. Thought, what other area of psychology is like positive psychology who I could make a better living from? And I thought of organisational psychology, which I knew nothing about. And I went back to university, back to Monash, and did a master's degree in org psych, and that's what I've been doing for nearly 30 years now. So a very quick summary of my career from there. I worked for about 5 years for a global consulting firm it was coined Didsbury back in the 90s and then became PDI, Personnel Decisions International. So that's where I learnt psych assessment and development and coaching and that sort of thing. In fact, did a 5-day master coaching program in 1998 before coaching was really a thing. And anyway, after 5 years there, I then had about nearly 9 years of internal roles, head of HR at State Trustees, general manager of estate planning, looking after lawyers, financial planners, accountants, doing wills and trusts and estates, very interesting stuff. And that was my first leadership role where I wasn't the expert in the topic area. Didn't know how to write a will, but I needed to know that my staff knew how to write a will, for example. Anyway, left that role, and then I went to Spotless as the group global head of OD. And it was interesting because State Trustees had about 600 staff, Spotless had about 33,000 staff. So it was an interesting experience in how do you drive change within a large organisation versus a very large organisation. And that was my last job as a paid employee in 2009, where I set up Steople nearly 14 years ago next month. And I'll tell you more about that afterwards. But that's how I got to where I am today.
Yeah, so a fairly logical progression from tennis into psychology based on your own experiences. Yeah.
It didn't look like that at the start, but you look back on it and it makes sense now.
Yeah. I was a mad keen basketballer growing up because I grew up in the mid-90s, right, when basketball was really hot. And, I was also interested in sports psychology. I was fortunate enough to work out in my 4th year of psych that, it's very hard to make a career as a sports psychologist.
Yeah.
And started to look like you did at what are the more positive aspects of psychology that I could be involved in. And that's also so very similar reason why I was drawn to organisational psychology because I saw it as a more valid a career path that was more likely to be able to pay the mortgage at the end of the day. Yeah.
Spot on. And look, I've had many stories like that. I've supervised about 100 master students in the last 12 years, and there's many of them that wanted to be a sports psych. So I started that way and realised there was a lack of career path, and this was probably the closest thing to it, except instead of on the tennis court or the football oval, it's in the world of work.
Yeah, that's right. So, like you mentioned, you are managing director now at Steople, and you've been doing that for about 14 years. So tell us a bit about what you do there.
So, it started on my kitchen bench at home by myself. A guy called Jason Smith joined me, and 14 years later, we've got a team of about 50 or so people around Australia, New Zealand and the US. We sort of mostly up and down the eastern seaboard of Australia. Melbourne's the largest office, and then we've got a few in Sydney, Canberra, Brisbane and Tassie, and small team in New Zealand, and about 12 or so in the US, head office in Oklahoma. So we started that about 5 years ago. In terms of what we do, our core purpose is pretty simple. It's to help our clients create great places to work and great cultures. In terms of how we do that, it's we have a model. It's a fairly simple model, but our breadth of services are pretty broad. It's an OE model, organisational effectiveness. And really our starting point is to understand business strategy and what the business is trying to achieve, and then ask, does your culture match that? And so have you got the right sort of behaviours and culture that's going to help you achieve your business objectives? Once we help them articulate that, then there's 4 kind of areas. One is around psych assessment for recruitment, to bring the right people in, not for the technical knowledge, but for their match to the culture and their behaviours. Then we move on to development, which could be individual coaching, development, high-performance team development, or leadership cohort development work. Then we move on to well-being, how to create a thriving and flourishing culture, which is certainly no doubt dear and near and dear to your heart and what you guys do. So the whole well-being area. And then the fourth sort of service area, if you like, is all around alignment. How do you get alignment of the right organisational design, structure, and career pathing for people as well? So they're the sort of four areas of service that help create great cultures. And probably the two biggest parts of what we do are the leadership and the wellbeing together. And certainly since COVID, there's a lot more of that, is the integration of great leadership to drive a thriving and flourishing culture.
Yeah, terrific. So almost end-to-end minus the outplacement, I guess.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, all the fun stuff.
Yeah.
All right. So what we're really going to talk with you about today is, I guess, leader mental health and psych health and safety for leaders. And I think something that we observe quite often is that leaders are often kind of the between a rock and a hard place a lot of the time when you're talking about that sort of middle management function in particular, where, you know, they're getting a lot of demands coming at them from the top. A lot of the time they're trying to do the best that they can to sort of protect their team or shield their team from excessive demands, but also trying to manage what their team needs from them. And so, yeah, they kind of cop it from both sides sometimes. So, you know, in your experience and in doing a lot of work and sort of coaching with leaders, what do you find gets in the way of them being able to look after their own mental health?
Obviously, it's a complex problem and it's not a simple answer, but I try to think of it in a couple of ways. The first thing that I talk about and think about that is not commonly spoken about is social norms. And I think it's really important to understand the pressures that we're all under and that leaders are under from a social perspective and what backgrounds we come from in terms of global thinking. So, you know, when we think about well-being, the first thing to think about is what is well-being and then what gets in the way of that. So for me, it's four things. It's social well-being, emotional, mental, and physical well-being. So if we think about those things, what are the impacts of our society on us? And I think about this a lot, particularly given I started my tennis journey in Tennessee, where 99% of people are Christians. And so I don't come from a Christian background. And so that religious belief had a big influence over people that live there. Versus if you were born in Afghanistan, it's 99% chance that you're going to believe in the Islamic faith. If you're born in different parts of the world, your thinking and your well-being, your approaches to physical, mental, psychological, social well-being are all going to be different. And we all assume that everyone thinks like us. And so I think the starting point is to really appreciate and understand that what are the impacts on me as a leader. I impact others, but others impact me, and the environment of the culture of the organisation, but also the society they live in, is going to influence my habits. And so I think this area is a little bit like unconscious bias. You can't really get rid of them, but you have to be aware of the social norms of the society that you belong to and the culture that you're within, and understand the limitations of that and the impact of that on you before you then start looking at yourself. And come back to any of that if you're interested in that topic, because I could talk about that for a long time. The second thing is probably priorities. Leaders get really, really busy, and so they focus on other things. So wellbeing ends up not being at the top. It gets pushed down to fifth or sixth, and there's other things that become more important. And then probably the third factor that stops leaders from taking care of themselves is the actual simple tools that they need, the knowledge and the skills of the tools, whether it's a relaxation technique or goal setting or self-awareness or self-talk or whatever. They haven't learned some of the skills necessary to minimise the barriers and then to take care of themselves.
Yeah, interesting. And the social norms piece, I think, you know, when we're looking at, like, especially multinational organisations, or, you know, where you will have people from all different countries and cultural backgrounds and religious backgrounds, sort of all coming together in one organisation, that can be quite a challenge when you're talking about things like leadership and followership behaviour as well. Things like power distance and those types of things. The assumptions that you might bring as, you know, a member of the senior executive, or, you know, a member of a functional team, where you're assuming particular types of behavioural patterns are going to be there because that's what you've always experienced, and then suddenly they're not there. Or like, so I've worked sort of in oil and gas for most of my career, and worked with lots of people who've kind of, you know, started out in Australia and then gone and worked in the Middle East or something like that, and have been really quite thrown and challenged in terms of how they can actually manage things like safety behaviours in, you know, working in those different, very, very different cultures. So, yeah, even sort of going, I guess, outside of those societal norms around mental health, I think even more broadly than that, you know, for a leader, being able to manage a team that's culturally diverse, you know, that could certainly add additional challenges and mental load, I guess.
Very much so. And actually, now that you've mentioned the Middle East, I was going to share a brief story, and it's just worth sharing something like this to prove how we all think so differently, and the lack of understanding of this can be a problem for a leader. There was a story that I read in a great book that I've forgotten the name of for the moment, but anyway, the story was an Australian woman went and worked in the Middle East. She learnt to speak, I think it was Egyptian, but anyway, and she was over there for a number of years. And her parents came over and they hired a driver to take them to see the pyramids. And so the parents were there. They had this lovely day out driving to the pyramids and having a look around and stuff. On the way back, it was a long couple of hours drive back to wherever they were. And they were going quite fast. I'm not sure, 100, 120 kilometres an hour. And the driver suddenly took his hands off the wheel. And he's driving for some time with his hands off the wheel. And the parents gone, hey, do something, talk to him. So she starts talking to him in Egyptian or whatever, saying, please put your hands on the wheel. And his response was something like, I think the words are, inshallah. I'm not sure if I got that quite right, which is basically it's in the hands of the gods. So his view was, whether I have my hands on the wheel or not doesn't make a difference. It's God. God is actually doing this, and I'm in his hands. Anyway, they obviously made it back to tell this story. And so it's an amazingly powerful story. And someone from a Western perspective goes, that's crazy. And yet if he tells that to his social norm friends, then they're going to think that's normal as well. And so that's just a pretty radical example of how we all think differently. Now, that thinking differently, if we as Westerners only view the world through our own eyes and we're managing multinationals, and we don't understand that, and we apply our logic, we're going to struggle.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, we have some interesting cultural norms here at our office too. So, and I don't think they would be understood in some other environments.
Some?
Some. Let's just say some. Hayden, we're obviously interested in particular in picking your brain on the mental health topic, given that's obviously what we cover on this podcast. We often talk about how can we improve the design and management of work or systems of work in order to protect people's well-being. But as you mentioned at the outset, leaders are often the meat and the sandwich. They're between a rock and a hard place, and often they they're protecting the people in their care and not maybe at a high enough level to influence the systemic drivers of well-being. So knowing that leaders, sometimes are caught in that between that rock and a hard place, what are some things that maybe they can do for themselves to protect their own well-being when they can't necessarily change some of the systems and structures that they have to fit within? Yeah,
great question. My focus is always on habits and behaviours, right? How do we change our own habits and behaviours? And if you don't mind, I'll give a very quick plug. So last year I wrote a book called Leaders, Do You Have Your Own Shit Together? And it is about how leaders need to, it's a bit like the analogy on a plane, first put on your own mask before you help others. And I certainly have that philosophy, which is behind your question. It's not the end point, but the starting point for taking care of others is actually taking care of yourself. And if you can take care of your own well-being, then you're going to be in a better place to look after others. So in terms of how you do that, obviously once you're aware of social norms and that sort of thing, just be mindful of that. I think the next thing is around motivation and prioritisation, and doing some real deep thinking about where does well-being fit into your life. Is it something that comes fifth or sixth, or is it number one or two? Where does it actually fit? And so do some thinking around, is this important for me, and is it more important than other things, is the starting point. And then from there to really think about some daily little tiny habits you can change and develop in order to change that. It's one day at a time. I remember a story by Simon Sinek, which I love. He said, if you clean your teeth in the morning, it's not going to get clean teeth. If you clean your teeth at night and morning, it's not going to get you clean teeth. It's the fact that you clean your teeth morning and night every day for your whole life that gets you clean teeth. So it's the daily habit. It's the same for the gym. You go, I join a gym. I go once, it doesn't get me fit. It's the fact that I go every day or 4 or 5 days a week for my life that actually is going to, get me in good shape. So I'd say the same for leaders. They need to actually look at their daily habits and daily routines and actually craft some goals that are small. And there's a guy, BJ Fogg, that you may have heard of, that's written a great book called Tiny Habits, and he talks about make your habits that you're changing tiny and laughably small. So I'd say pick some things that are just tiny, laughably small, but do them every single day and begin to change some of those things. And maybe even think about whether or not the area you want to get better at. Is it your mental health? Is it your physical health? Is it your emotional health? Is it your social health? And so all of those things are important to kind of think about. But then once you've thought about that, start small and begin to work on yourself. And that role modeling of doing that will be helpful for others around you as well.
Hi listeners, Jason here. We hope you're enjoying this latest podcast episode. Now, if you're like Joelle, Alicia and myself and enjoy learning from the best, then the Flourish DX Academy is for you. The Academy includes free e-learning courses on the ISO 45003 standard for psychological health and safety at work, and associated topics such as how to conduct a psychosocial risk assessment and how to create the business case for psych health and safety. All courses feature high-quality videos, downloadable resources, multi-choice questions, and a downloadable training certificate on completion. Take your learning to the next level with all Flourish DX Academy courses included within the Flourish DX mobile app. Select podcast episodes from the Psych Health and Safety podcast and sister podcasts from Canada and the USA are also included. Get started with Flourish DX for free at www.flourishdx.com/get-started. That's www.flourishdx.com/get-started. Now back to this episode. Yeah, I definitely can resonate with that, starting small. And in fact, I saw some research presented on one of the morning shows recently around, it was obviously very good research, that people can do bite-sized exercise. So rather than having to think, I have to do a 45-hour workout to get any benefit from it.
45 hours?
45 minutes, sorry. 45 minutes, that'd be a long, yeah. But, just even doing a few minutes at a time, like you say, laughably small. Can you do something every day? That's what's going to get the benefit. So, it's starting really, really small and starting to build up some momentum from that.
Jason, another quick little story on that I find that I remember and sort of sticks in my brain is BJ Fogg tells the story about himself. He said he was a fit runner, but he wasn't very strong in his upper body, and he wanted to get stronger in the upper body. And so he talks about having something you already do every day that's a trigger for something else that you can begin to develop a new habit. And he says, right, well, something I do every day, I drink a lot of water to try to stay hydrated, but it actually makes me go to the toilet to pee. He said, every time I go to the toilet, which is about 5 times a day, I'm going to do 2 push-ups afterwards. So he started doing 2 push-ups every time he went to the toilet, and he'd be doing 10 push-ups roughly every day. And he said, I'm going to do that for a month. And if I could sustain that, I'll see what I do. So he gradually increased to the point where that was more and more. And then he, developed, I'm not sure how many, got up to 100 or something. But he started laughably small. I'm just going to do 2 push-ups 5 times a day after this. And so that's an example of something that might be laughably small. And sure, he didn't get strong by actually doing the push-ups 10 a day, but it was the habit that was created that then allowed him to, over time, build up strength.
Yeah. I love all those examples of physical health, and I love how they can be transposed for mental health as well.
That's right.
Some people are put off by going, I don't want to do like an hour of mindfulness. Well, you can do a week's worth of mindfulness and it's not going to make you mentally healthy for the year. It's more the smaller habits of mindfulness or some of these other self-care practices that are going to provide the benefit.
Exactly. You can move that across to instead of doing 15 minutes of mindfulness a day, just do 1 minute. Start with 1 minute a day, before you sit down at your desk, you open your computer up, before you answer any emails, spend 1 minute doing some mindfulness breathing and do it every day for a month and see how you go.
Yeah, no, I think it's great advice. Start small.
I don't know that I would be able to start with a minute of mindfulness in this office, Jason.
No, not with the distractions that you get thrown at you left, right and centre.
Sometimes literally thrown at me.
Yes, literally thrown at you.
Yeah.
Distractions. Hey, catch this ball.
Yeah. Not even, hey, catch this ball. Just there's a ball coming at me.
Yeah, duck.
No,
not
warning.
even a warning.
No, just get that peripheral vision working.
Yeah. Well, we have you are really ideally located the furthest away from the basketball ring.
But I'm also like the closest to you in the office, and you're generally the source of any projectiles coming in my direction.
Yes, you too. Yeah, I can understand more and more every day why you want me to be confined to an office and not out in the bullpen.
Yeah. Never going to happen, though.
No, it's not.
No.
No. I like
Anyway.
the distractions.
Joelle, I would normally advise you to then not do it in the office, but then you've got a 10-year-old son at home and he might be distracting as well. So I'm not sure where you can do it.
No. Probably not in the car while I'm driving to the office either. Not advisable. Maybe I could just sit in the car park and have my mindfulness in the car before I get out of the car.
Yeah, I might throw stuff at your car then from the window.
I mean, that seems less likely.
What's Joelle doing in there?
Yeah, what's she doing? She's bang on the window. All right, so I guess the other thing that leaders are probably interested in other than their own health is what are things that they can do to support the mental health of their team members, again, especially where they're maybe not empowered to create change at a systems level, where that's going to have the biggest impact on their teams. What are some other strategies that they can use in that situation?
I think there's two sort of ways to think about this. Firstly is if you take care of yourself, that in itself, by modelling the right behaviours, is actually going to send a strong message. It's a bit like parents who tell their children to do stuff and they never listen. They only watch and model what you do rather than what you say. And you guys with young kids would know that. It's the same with leadership. Modelling will have a big difference itself without you saying anything. But once you've done that, the next thing to do is to think about this there's kind of probably two ways. I think about it from a proactive, preventative perspective rather than a reactive perspective. Obviously, there's a number of things you can do once people are struggling, but my view would be let's focus on the proactive, preventative things that a leader can do. So there's a whole lot of research around the things that people want to focus on their well-being. And I like to think of this as both about performance and well-being. So a leader needs to focus on driving performance and productivity and outcomes, and they should also give equal attention to the well-being of their team. And I think the key word there is and. Often leaders think it's one or the other. I need to drive performance or I need to drive well-being. And you go, no, you can do both for long-term success. So, for example, one of the things that people always look for is purpose and meaning in their life. Now, if you add direction to that, a leader needs to provide direction to help know where we're going, which helps performance, but also give them purpose and meaning about why we're doing what we're doing. That's going to enhance both performance and well-being because you give them both of those things that people need. A lot of leaders don't understand that. They focus on the task and a list of stuff they got to do, and they actually fail to spend a bit of time on the meaning side of it. Another example is consistency. Leaders that chop and change all the time. One week, my leader said this week they're saying that, causes a lot of stress for people. So leaders need to try to be consistent in their behaviours from week to week. Now, yes, they need to be agile and adapt to circumstances, but that doesn't mean they need to chop and change their decisions. That can reduce performance and reduce well-being at the same time. Another one, there's been a lot of work in the last probably 10 years around authenticity. And Brown O'Brien done some amazing work about vulnerability and those sorts of things. So people want to work for leaders that are authentic, that are real, that are human, and that are imperfect. And so if you are the sort of leader that thinks you need to stand up on a pedestal and be perfect and have everything right, have all the answers, that's going to reduce well-being. So you need to be authentic, vulnerable, human, courageous, all those kinds of things that Brown O'Brien talks about and others that work on authenticity.
Well, so you really hit the jackpot there, didn't you? With a flawed boss,
Sure, let's call it the jackpot.
People want to work with leaders who are flawed, who aren't perfect. It's amazing.
It's funny. It's funny, Jason, when you say that, because leaders sometimes do struggle with knowing, what does that actually mean? Do I stand up there and say how terrible I am? Now, people don't want that either. And I heard a term recently.
You won't hear me say that, Hayden.
No, see, well, Jason's joking about being flawed. He also has an enormous ego.
Yeah. But Joelle is very happy to point out when I do make a mistake.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
She's just trying to help you.
Yeah.
So
it's very helpful, Joelle. Keep it up.
On a serious note, I know we're joking, but I think Adam Grant said a phrase recently that I heard, which I really like, which is confident humility, which is, I think, a leader that is able to say, look, I don't have all the answers, but I know we can get there, right? Is kind of confident humility.
Oh,
and
no,
I think
he
that
called it humble narcissists, because I said, Joelle, that's me.
And I said humble.
Yeah, I actually saw that too. Yeah, I really liked that. I thought that was great.
Yeah.
So I think that's authenticity, but I guess also a willingness to change.
Why do you smile at me when you say that?
I think there's one more that I haven't mentioned there. Actually, there's a lot more, but in the time we've got, there's one more that probably relates right to your area of expertise too, which I haven't mentioned, which is psychological safety and trust. A leader needs to be able to build deep levels of trust and psychological safety. And I see those two terms, by the way, like a Venn diagram overlaying each other. There's some overlap between trust and psych safety, but they're not the same things, but they are certainly related. And so if a leader can create a really safe environment for people to speak up, where there's no fear, and I can say what I think without worry about retribution or anything like that. The hierarchy, power, distance stuff you were talking about before, that's going to help people's well-being, because they go, okay, I've got a problem, I can talk to my boss about it. But if there is no psychological safety, then that creates huge problems. There's no avenue to discuss challenges or problems, etc. So that's another one that I should have mentioned.
Yeah, it's definitely an important one. Having being able to say, I don't know how to do this, or I'm not sure about what I'm doing here. Am I doing the right thing? Or I disagree with your decision. All of those are really an important aspect of your own well-being at work, for sure.
Mm.
Well, Hayden, it's been really interesting talking to you about, I guess, some of the work that you do at Steople and some of your insights into how leaders can look after their own well-being and well-being of, I guess, the people that they care for. Yep. But you've also been recently appointed the chair of the College of Organisational Psychologists. So congratulations, first of all.
Thank you very much.
But we'd be really interested to hear what's your vision for the college.
Look, it's very early days. I took over as the chair only about 2 weeks ago, so it's not all well formulated, but I was the chair-elect for a year and I was on the committee for 2 years, so I've had time to think about this and observe what's happening and, observe what's happening right now. And there's probably two main things that I'd be keen to do in 2 years. You have 2 years as the chair, so you have to set your goals achievable in 2 years. And one of them is, I'm not sure if there's a sense of belonging for my, my industry, my fellow org psych. So one of the visions is within 2 years to create a much greater sense of belonging for org psychs, to feel like I belong to a sense of community, a sense of belonging to a community of people who are like me. So that's one. I think if we can do that, a secondary aim is to build the brand and reputation of organisational psychologists. In the work that I've been doing for 14 years and beyond now, probably 30 years, but at Steople and beyond, I feel like as org psychs, we're really valued and we do great work. And quite often it's an asset to be an org psych. Not always, because sometimes it's full of psychobabble. But if we can take the evidence-based research and make it pragmatic and simple and commercial, then we add a lot of value. But I'm not sure if our whole profession as a collective is seen like that. So I really would like to build our brand and a reputation right across Australia, so more people want to choose to be org psychs, and those people that may be thinking about clinical psych or sports psych or forensic or educational psychology, a few more of those choose to become organisational psychologists, because I truly believe it's the best area of organisational psychology, psychology.
Yeah, I haven't tried the other ones, but I would say it's a good area to be in. But we're definitely seeing lots more demand for organisational psychology, particularly as it pertains to psychosocial risk management, given that organisational psychologists have that systems kind of thinking, and they consider work design. It's never been a better time to be an org psych, I don't think.
I think the psychosocial risk stuff is a Monty for us as org psychs to come in there and add value, because clients are saying, I want an organisational psychologist to work on this stuff. Yep.
Yeah, one thing I would caution org psychs, though, is to make sure that you build your comprehension around health and safety and risk management. Because it's not something that's core to what we learn within our degree. And we need to understand and use that terminology, particularly because the people that tend to own this are health and safety professionals. So we need to be able to speak their language.
Yeah. I think, like from an advocacy perspective as well, you know, there's a lot of focus from government and from in the media at the moment around demands on, you know, mental health providers and that sort of thing. And I think there's such an opportunity really to frame organisational psychology as part of that prevention approach, you know, that upstream, actually reducing demands rather than waiting for people to become ill and then providing services. So I think that's a really important aspect of I guess what you might be able to do in your time as chair as well, in terms of positioning org psychs in that policy discussion, I guess.
Yeah, spot on. Totally agree, 100%. And I think many of those relationships are going to be really important. With OH&S people, risk management people, governance, you know, the whole spectrum of stakeholders. We as org psychs need to know the role we can play, but how do we fit within that sort of ecosystem?
Yeah. So what are your key focus areas then for your 2 years as chair?
There's a number of things in terms of what I want to do, but also how. So I'm going to actually start with my how. There's 12 or so members of the National Committee, and I'm the chair. And I think that, and all those people are from around Australia, different states, and we meet virtually. And so we actually have to operate as a team, first of all. And I see myself as kind of the conductor of the orchestra. I'm chairing, but there's some very bright, smart, capable people, whether they're practitioners or academics, that add to that. And so my first sort of challenge is to build that great team. And it's called a national committee, but I don't really like the word committee. I like the word team. So my first goal is to walk the talk and actually create a great team that's high performing itself to deliver on the things we want to deliver on. And a second aspect of the how is around communication. I don't think we communicate well enough with our members, the other org psychs around Australia. So I've just actually appointed someone as the head of comms to help me to communicate better to our members, so they know the value that they're getting from their membership, which is really important. And what we're doing, because we're doing some great things, but sometimes we fail to tell people about what we're actually doing. So that's probably the second how. And a third one is something that's very relevant right now is there's sometimes a challenge in the relationship between member organisations and their main body, so the colleges and the Australian Psychological Society. And I've joined at a time where that relationship's not as positive as it can be. And so one of my big focus areas is to help find a way to make sure that we are all psychologists working together towards the same goals, aligned together, because we can help each other if we're together rather than fragmented in the way we approach things. So they're probably my three things I'm going to focus on in terms of the how I will lead. In terms of the what, there's three main things that I want to focus on. Apart from these three things, I'm going to stay out of the way of any whats. One of them is there's a fantastic national workforce survey into the future of work. I was involved in setting this up. It's been about a 2 to 2.5 year project just to get to this point. Professor Patrick Dunlop from Curtin University, the Future of Work Institute, is leading this with a couple of research assistants, and the survey's gone out. He's analysing the data. I looked at the first draft of the report last week and gave him feedback. We're at the process of getting a really good business writer to take it from an academic paper to a business paper that business leaders can read and understand. And we'll be ready in about 6 weeks, I think, to tell the world about the results. And we're hoping if it goes really well, this is an annual national workforce survey like no other around Australia that we do every year. And businesses look at the data, they get it for free, don't have to pay anyone else for it. It's evidence-based research, really good stuff. And we're hoping that if we get the publicity right, people and businesses like it, then they look forward to it each year. So that to me builds our brand, our reputation and whatever. And so I'm really keen to kind of make that an annual thing, which is fantastic. The second thing is there's, again, a lot happening in WA. So next year, the Industrial Org Psych conference is on in Perth. I think it's the 24th to 27th of October next year. So we're already well and truly on the way we're getting keynote speakers and everything organised right now. And I think we've sent out a save the date for it. So that's going to be a big thing on the calendar for next year, and I'll play a role directly in that. And probably the third thing, I think, one of the keys, if not the key reasons for why we exist as a college is to provide CPD, professional development, for our members at a state and national level to keep everyone up to date with psychosocial risks, whatever's going on, team effectiveness, whatever, coaching, whatever's happening now, we have to continue to do that. So a big focus on making sure there's a regular, consistent CPD activity in each state around Australia and nationally. If I can do those three things and lead in the way I've described, then I'll be pretty happy.
Well, there's certainly some impressive focus areas there. We'll have to get Patrick on the podcast once that report's published and have a chat with him about that. So thanks for that hot tip.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, definitely worthy goals, I think, for your 2 years in the chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, and maybe once Joelle supervises me to become a registered organisational psychologist, I could join the college.
As long as we make sure that we add value to you and you want to join, and that's what we're aiming to do.
Yeah, and I don't embarrass the college by my membership.
There's that.
That is a risk, right? Hayden, it's I agree. I think they're great aspirations, and it sounds like with your management experience that the college is lucky to have you. And I wish you the best of luck during your 2-year tenure.
Thank you.
To achieve the goals that you've set out to achieve.
No worries at all. I appreciate it. Yes, it's going to be fascinating trying to juggle all those things whilst also having another day job at the same time. So if I can give it the attention it needs, that would be great.
And let's not forget how hard it is to make a team out of a group of organisational psychologists.
Yes. Or an argument of organisational
psychologists. That's the collective noun. Yeah. Hayden, one of the questions I like to ask all of the guests who come on the podcast is, what are your hopes for the future of workplace mental health?
Thank you. Great question. It's interesting. I've been working in this space for 30 years now, and we used to call it stress management, and then we'd call it, something else, and it's changed its names over the years and what we refer to it as. But I've thought for a long time, it's the COVID's helped us a lot to focus on it, but I've been talking about wellbeing for many years before COVID sort of made it something that everyone's talking about. I would like mental health and wellbeing to be kind of just part of what all leaders do, as part of you thinking about what is your role as a leader, that it's natural to think this is part of it. I think it's only since COVID that it's become something that more leaders have thought about. But I think every leader should just make it part of what they do. Yes, to create long-term sustainable success, this is part of what I should be doing. There's still leaders out there that want to go back to the old ways and don't think it's part of their role. I'm here to drive performance, and I don't have any role to play in their well-being. And I think I want to lessen that and get as many people as possible understanding that mental health and well-being is a key part of your role as a leader.
And they obviously need to build up their competency to be able to achieve that or deliver that.
Yeah, and I think also just helping them to understand the connection between, a mentally healthy workforce and productivity and being able to deliver. Like they're sort of intrinsically linked, right?
That's right. Well, that's where the difference is between long-term and short-term. I do get people saying, business people challenging me and say, do you really need that? Here's examples of people that are good leaders without taking care. I say, in the short term, you can drive performance without taking care of well-being. But if you want long-term sustainable performance, this has to be part of it.
Yeah. And the other thing I'm trying to get across to people at the moment is that, good work is good for people. So your best mental health intervention might actually be improving work rather than a typical mental health intervention like people might think of, like an EAP or mental health first aid or something like that.
Spot on. And those things like EAP are very reactive rather than the things you're talking about give people challenge, satisfaction, which enhances wellbeing.
So any words of advice for listeners who are interested in working in the field of psych health and safety or mentally healthy work?
Simple advice. It's a growing field, an exciting field where you can affect more than just individuals. You can affect a whole organisation, huge populations of people, if you can make a difference. So get involved.
Very simple advice. Good advice. Thank you.
Great advice. Yeah. Well, Hayden, it's been a real pleasure having you on the podcast today. So thank you so much for sharing a bit about some of the observations and experience you've had in working with leaders to look after their own wellbeing and the wellbeing of others, as well as some of your goals for the College of Organisational Psychologists.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on, Jason and Joelle.
Awesome. All right, well, listeners, that brings us to the end of this episode. So don't forget, we do record these over video whilst we're having the conversations with our guests. You probably won't want to check out this video now that you've just listened to the whole thing, but you can check out some of our other videos. We also use the video to create short clips that we put on the Flourish DX LinkedIn channel. So head over there if you want to see some of the best bits of all the conversations that we have on all our various podcasts. And while you're over on LinkedIn, feel free to connect with Joelle and myself and Hayden as well if you'd like to continue the conversation in that forum. But thanks, everyone. We will catch you next episode.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow Flourish DX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychealthandsafety.com.